afternoon, everyone. My name is Roshankevich. I'm a George Washington MBA student, and I will be your moderator for this session with Abby Freer. This is the George Washington October Conference with a theme in creativity and entrepreneurship. And today's topic is raising capital. We'll talk about how profit and non-profit organizations raise capital in the COVID-19 environment. Before I go over the agenda, I want to go over the logistics of this meeting. All the participants except the panelists will be muted. If you do have any questions, please utilize the chat box, and Abby Freer will be helping me to monitor those. And if you do have any questions, in case we run out of time and you have any questions for the panelists, please watch the chat box. Abby will provide the contact information for the speakers. At the end, we'll have pre-coordinated questions. So therefore, the agenda is tight, so be mindful of that. For the speakers, we'll issue you a 2-minute warning to ensure that you are staying within your time frame. With that note, I'll transition to agenda. So we'll do next slide. We'll do introductions and objectives of this presentation and session. Then Molly will take over and cover the raising capital for nonprofit organization that targets youth at risk entering the state. Then Leo will take over and talk about raising capital for profit organization, and he'll drill down into the difference between the IPOs and special purpose acquisition companies. And the last but not least, Anna Rower will share with us how her organization raises capital, but she will take us outside of the United States and to the Sub-Saharan Africa region and shows her attempts and raising capital efforts pay off outside the United States. And the last agenda item will be a Q&A and close-out comments. So our speakers today, we'll start with the objectives. The objective of the session is to discuss, again, the ways the profit and nonprofit organizations pivoted and adjusted to COVID-19 environment and how they raising capital to sustain their operations. And we have 3 speakers that will represent nonprofit and profit organization. And Molly Cook is the trustee at Plummer Youth Promise nonprofit organization. Leo Valentine is our associate director at Captivate Transaction Services, and Anna is our senior director at the For Water nonprofit organization. With that said, I want to give a big thank you to the rest of the team. Abby Freer, she is the co-moderator, and also the rest of the team who are not presenting, but they played a huge role in putting this presentation together. It's Jennifer, Vincent, Jonathan, Lauren, Jay, and Matthew. On that note, I will transition to Molly, and she will cover her topic. And there is 3 sections. Please tell us about your organization's background, mission, your key fundraising strategies, and how did you adjust or pivot in the COVID-19 environment to continue raising funds for your organization. Over to you, Molly.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm a trustee at the Plummer Youth Promise in Salem, Massachusetts. I'm broadcasting live from up here on the North Shore. Let me tell you a little bit first about our organization. Each year in the United States, more than 23,000 young adults leave the foster care system with no family to count on. These young people face grim outcomes, including high rates of homelessness, unemployment, early parenting, and lack of education. It doesn't have to be that way. Plummer's mission is to set a standard of excellence that improves outcomes for young people in or at risk of entering state care by deeply engaging the youth, families, and the systems that impact them to develop permanent family relationships. That word permanent is really important. At Plummer Youth Promise, we envision a world in which every young person has a family, unconditionally committed to nurturing, protecting, and guiding them to a successful adulthood. Family can be biological, but that's not always the case. The essential thing is a stable and lifelong commitment to the youth. Often when a child in foster care turns 16, professionals turn the focus away from finding a forever family Instead, they focus on the self-sufficiency and independence needed as an adult, which is something we did in our organization for a long time. We thought if the kids under our care could hold a job and pay bills and live independently in an apartment, they would do okay. Turns out that wasn't happening. Our outcome measures were showing that they weren't doing as well as we hoped. We switched our focus to permanency, finding these kids permanent families. And we have seen a big shift in our outcome measures. Kids are thriving. So we now have full-time social workers committed to sleuthing in child's entire life to find anyone who might be willing to serve as a permanent family member. And sometimes this is a group of many people, and sometimes it's one, sometimes it's biological, and sometimes it isn't. I'll never forget a social worker reading through a funeral guest book of a family member who had passed away and finding an old babysitter who came back into the fold and was willing to parent one of our kids. So it's pretty powerful work. It's really easy to get behind our mission. Everybody needs a family. I'm going to turn now and tell you a little bit about our key fundraising strategies. I'm going to talk first about them in a normal environment and then in the COVID landscape and tell you how they're a bit different. Most of our donations come from individual major gifts. We are partially funded by the state because kids in foster care have their shelter and food needs paid for by the state, but we feel that that often is not enough. We need flexible spending to get these kids what they need. Should one of our kids need art therapy, we want to be able to provide it. Should someone have an interest in playing the drums, we want to be able to get them lessons. That flexible spending is really important. We are also susceptible to the political climate. Budgets can be cut and they can be cut quickly and we have to be ready to respond. So we rely more now on individual giving than we have in the past, and it's been quite successful. Last year we yielded 1.26 million from private fundraising. We are pretty diversified in terms of our fundraising strategies. We don't rely on a single big event. Instead, we have a number of small events that are very relational, obviously, because we're an organization that cares about family. So it's a lot about the relationships that we have with our donors and amongst one another. We also have some small events. We do a paddleboard race every summer off the beach where we're located, and we have a team that runs the Boston Marathon. Obviously, that was impacted this year because the marathon did not happen, and it looks like it may not happen next year. So we are going to have to think creatively around that one. We also have a monthly giving program, which we call the Plumber Circle, which I'll talk about in the next section, but we are trying to grow as one of our COVID strategies. One example of how we used our annual fund was during the shutdown. Our census numbers dropped because kids weren't being seen as often by state social workers. So it looked like we had less kids than we did. So we needed the staff that we had, but they weren't being paid for because our census numbers were low. So we used our annual fund to pay for staff salaries because it was in the best interest of our kids to have enough staff and to be safe. I'm going to talk briefly about a capital campaign. So in organizations like ours, every 10 years or so, sometimes a little bit longer, we'll engage a capital campaign, which is where we're trying to raise significant funds on top of our annual fund. For us, it's in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 million to do something big. And for us right now, it's a building. So we are still housed, our residential program is still housed in the original Victorian bequeathed by Caroline Plummer, who started our organization in the 1850s. Our building is up to code and safe, but it doesn't meet our mission. We don't think it's okay that kids who have PTSD would have to share a bathroom, for example. We had put our campaign on hold, obviously, but it looks like we are going to get back on track. Something interesting has happened in this COVID landscape. Wealthy people have more money. The stock market has done quite well, and wealthy families can often have pretty extensive travel and discretionary budgets for things like concerts and meals out, which aren't happening. So there is, in fact, extra money, and we really could use that extra money to help us build a safe and useful building for the kids that we serve. So we are going to reevaluate our campaign and get back into planning. We are going to step back a bit from planning because we realize our office space needs are much less than we realize because so much of our workforce can be remote, which is a nice plus in the COVID landscape. We didn't know that before. Now, let me talk a little bit about how our fundraising has evolved. We are going to grow our Plumber Circle, which is our monthly giving program. We find with monthly giving, it's usually a credit card, that just gets automatically charged people tend to give more. And so that's a very successful way, especially for us to access our smaller donors who are just as important as our major donors. We have increased our target double last year. We've also started an Instagram account. I know it sounds crazy to say we started one because we should have had one a long time ago, but we relied so much on in-person, coffees and talks with people. But now we're using social media to reach out to our donor base. We've also started doing grassroots fundraising. So we will ask folks for a particular need. We'll say, student X and Y, they really need this particular type of therapy to manage their PTSD symptoms. Will you fund it? And that's different than what we've done before, and it's been successful. And we also have been doing stewardship calls with our larger donors so that they can stay in touch with our executive team and know what's happening in our organization and stay connected. Some of the difficulties we've faced, obviously we can't have our in-person events, so it feels very impersonal and a bit sad right now. The grassroots efforts, while they're working, it's hard to make those individual asks and sometimes often of people. So we're concerned about donor fatigue. We haven't noticed any. In fact, we're up $50,000 from this time last year. So we haven't had any dip in our fundraising, which is great. We also have a very well-staffed office. We have 3 full-time development people on our team, which is rare for an organization of our size. We were obviously gearing up for a campaign, which is why we have it staffed the way we do, but it has been extremely helpful in the COVID landscape. And I think that's a commitment we'll continue to make at the board level to make sure that we have an office of that size. We will also be pursuing more grants. There are foundations, big family foundations that exist in this country that fund organizations like ours. So we have to apply for those on a yearly basis. And I'll end with one of the mission-driven questions that we are facing in this COVID and potentially political landscape, which is if organizations, there are a number of organizations who contract us within our state and in other states to train them in our permanency work. They now understand it's important, but they don't know how to do it. We've known it's important for a while and we've figured out how to do it. So we're training people. If states are no longer including that in their budget, are we going to consider privately fundraising so that we can continue to do that work, because we feel it is so critical. Permanency is the key. Kids need families forever. So I'll leave it there, and maybe we can come back to that in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. It's amazing what social media can do, right? Whether it's nonprofit or for-profit organization. Thank you for your inputs. We'll transition to Leo Valentine. And Leo, the same touch points, your organization's background and mission, key fundraising strategies, and how did you pivot and change in the COVID-19 environment? Over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Stu. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, so just a quick introduction. So my name is Leo Valentine, and I'm an associate director in Protivity's transaction services team. As far as my organization goes, it's a global consulting firm that was launched in 2002. It's one of the many teams that came out of the whole Arthur Andersen debacle, and basically is owned by Robert Half. It's actually a subsidiary of Robert Half to this day. Our firm focuses on a variety of consulting areas, including tech, risk and compliance, internal audit, business performance improvement, and transaction services. Size-wise, we're over 4,500 employees with over 80 offices in 20 countries around the world, so pretty decent size. And as far as our mission goes, I mean, it's what you would expect from a consulting firm. It's to team with clients to protect and enhance enterprise value by identifying, anticipating, and solving critical business problems through the various consulting offerings that I just mentioned. So that's kind of the quick overview of our organization and the mission. But with that, I'll go ahead and I'll jump into some of the key fundraising strategies. So just to be clear, in my position, I'm obviously not dealing with fundraising and capital raising for actual Protivity. What we do is we assist clients with due diligence for certain deals that can lead to capital raising or mergers. And this is done through the equity side, which I work with on buy side and sell side due diligence, mergers and acquisitions. The buy side, we work very closely with PE and corporate. On the sell side, we work very closely with IB, investment banks. And on the debt side, we also have a separate team that does operational diligence reviews for revolving debt facilities, but that's a different animal. But today, with the IPO and the special purpose acquisition with fundraising, I want to focus specifically on the equity side, and we'll table the debt side for another time. But basically how I want to do this is I'll give an overview of a SPAC for those of you that might not know how they work, and then I can kind of get into the differences between the two, the traditional IPO and the SPAC, and then I can get into the involvement of the SPAC and the fundraising during COVID. So basically, in the most layman terms possible, the SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, is basically a blank check company, as they call it, is a publicly traded shell company, and it's created for the sole purpose of acquiring an unspecified private target. And this can essentially be viewed as an alternative to accessing the equity markets versus a traditional IPO. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But the best way I can explain a SPAC is kind of going through each player that's involved in the SPAC. And the first one, first and foremost, would be the founders or the sponsors. When I'm talking about the founders or sponsors, these are typically, guys with private equity or investment banking experience, investment experience, and they'll typically have a specific strong industry experience. I mean, that's how they're going to raise funds, right? Because they need to know, the individuals who are giving them funds need to know that these individuals are actually, really learned in the area. And a good example of that, I worked on a SPAC deal about 3 years ago. The two guys from private equity had worked quite a bit in the construction area, and they ended up doing a deal in Minnesota with an insulation construction company that really felt that they got a lot from adding the individuals to the team. But anyway, back to the founders and sponsors. The experience, they typically have experience with IPOs and M&A. They'll decide to launch a SPAC, and they'll meet with underwriters. They'll file the IPO paperwork. And then once that's all done, they meet with investors, and then the SPAC is listed on the public market, publicly traded. So that kind of gets us into our next party here is the investors. So these are your institutional investors. And basically, they'll invest money goes into a pool, which is divvied up in the form of shares and warrants. The investors put trust in the reputation of the SPAC industry experts, as I just mentioned in my construction example. The funds received from investors are held in a trust. And once those funds are provided, the SPAC will have 24 months to announce an acquisition. And this could sometimes be extended, but as a general rule, you'll typically have 24 months to announce, to complete. The funds, usually they're going to get a deal done because that's basically what these PE and IB guys want to do. But let's say they can't get the deal done, all the funds are required to be returned to the investors after that 24-month period. So this gets us to our last party, which is the target company. So basically, these sponsors and founders are pursuing a target company, what you would call a fully operating private company. The target could also be looking for funding too, may like the idea of going public, especially in times as of now where they could be cash strapped. But once the target is identified, the sponsors and the actual target will agree to an actual purchase price. And then what actually happens after that is the investors have to vote on the deal. And let's say they actually vote yes, the SPAC shares are delisted, those public SPAC shares of the empty shell company, and the investors receive shares in a new business that is acquired, what we refer to as the listed successor company. This is essentially a reverse merger, but with an empty shell company with no history. So that's kind of like the overview of a SPAC. Now I want to get into the comparison of the capital raise of the traditional IPO versus SPAC. So with a SPAC, we typically view it as an easier process for a target. I mean, if you're a target company and the SPAC, is pursuing you, the target company doesn't have to, find underwriters. They don't have to go on road shows and pitch to investors. They're basically merging the company with individuals with industry and IPO experience. But a lot of what you would typically do in a traditional IPO has already been done. And this can be appealing during times of high volatility, and I'll talk about that in a second. But key takeaways I kind of want to drive home when we're talking about a SPAC versus traditional IPO is with the SPAC, you have the target company, the private company, and that signs with one party who are the SPAC sponsors, those PE and IB individuals, for a fixed amount of money at a negotiated price. They sign and announce the deal, and then the investors vote, and then they exchange the shares from the SPAC to the newly formed company. With a traditional IPO, you announce the deal before negotiating the price. You don't know the interested party, so the target won't know the interested parties until you announce and start marketing on those roadshows I just talked about. And basically, the target or the company is only learning about how much money it can raise after several months of discussion with underwriters and investors. And this can fall through too. I mean, it can be tabled, if the market slides, as we've seen in 2020, there's been quite a bit of volatility. But that's a lot different than your SPAC, as I mentioned before, where the money and the actual investors, the funds are already there. So that's some of the key points I really want to drive home. And a couple other ones are the cost perspective. The fees are generally viewed as lower with the SPAC. And that's general investment banking fees. It should be noted that there could be what you would call, I guess, hidden fees with a SPAC. I mean, these SPAC founders, the PE and IB individuals, they're obviously not doing this to be nice, right? They wanna make money off of it too. So what they're doing is they're actually receiving shares. I believe it's up to 20% founder shares at a huge discount. So depending on how you're looking at it from a cost perspective, there are hidden fees where you're giving up a good portion, the target is, of its company to the founders. However, as general IB fees go, it's typically cheaper through the SPAC route. And from a time perspective, I mean, this is one of the biggest things. A SPAC's an empty shell company, right? So it's usually listed in 3 to 5 months after the sponsors go through all the issues with the underwriters, and basically it's a pretty quick process. With your traditional IPO, it could be up to a year and a half. So that's kind of the key fundraising strategies and the difference between the IPO and the special purpose acquisition. Now jumping into the involvement of the fundraising during COVID-19, I think this is the most applicable piece of this presentation with SPACs, specifically with SPACs, because SPACs basically are, I mean, 2020 is kind of being referred to as the year of SPACs. You know, some PitchBook data I got, SPACs represent almost half of US IPO filings as of September 2020, and that's with a net intake of over 35 billion, so it's quite a bit. And this is all the while traditional IPOs are also slowing. And some of the biggest areas you'll see are clean tech. It's a good time for a lot of these unprofitable startups with R&D heavy to get into the sector and strike up partnerships and to go public. Two good examples you might know that happened. Nikola and Lordstown Motors, one outside of the clean tech, DraftKings. I mean, there's a lot of big businesses, and a lot of this is driven by private equity sponsors. So a lot of private equity, TPG being one of them, are sponsoring a lot of these SPACs, and basically it's beneficial for excuse me, for a PE firm because they're getting a larger economic stake for less upfront in the business. They don't have to raise funds from LPs, and they can draw from public backers. So I mean, that's really kind of what's driving the SPAC push here, and that's why a lot of individuals who might have wanted to go to an IPO and then maybe tabled it might want to do it through a SPAC. I mean, it's not as susceptible to market up and downs, and it's kind of tied to how much money it raises from investors. It's different than the IPO, and basically with the market right now, where companies are in need of cash, if you're looking for public funds, you're not worrying so much about trying to find investors, as the SPAC's already done that for you. So that's kind of the involvement and why it's so hot right now. But that's basically all I have right now on SPACs, and happy to answer some questions later.
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, every time I open newspaper nowadays, I see a new SPAC showing up, and some
it's crazy.
Highly publicized startups company choosing this route versus IPO.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we'll transition to Anna Rohr. And Anna, tell us about your organization, its mission, again, key fundraising strategies, and what have you done differently since COVID-19 started? Over to you.
Sure, thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you today. As Dual mentioned, my name's Anna Rohr, and I serve as the Senior Director of Operations for Water4. Water4 is an Oklahoma-based international nonprofit organization that starts and scales social enterprises throughout sub-Saharan Africa and equips them to provide safe, affordable, and sustainable water, sanitation, and hygiene services for the communities they serve. So we do this in a number of ways. We do this through partnership with local Africa-based businesses who are meeting local needs, through job creation that provides local economic opportunities, through innovative technology that lowers capital costs and keeps water affordable for their customers, through leadership development that empowers leaders to grow with the increasing demands of their evolving businesses, through rigorous training in business, finance, marketing, and sales, through contextualized technical support for operations and maintenance of the water systems, and through an area-based approach that improves sustainability, economic viability, and social impact. So since 2008, when Water4 was founded, we've had the opportunity to impact the lives of over 1.75 million people in more than 30 countries through safe water. We've installed more than 6,000 water projects, which have impacted 1.5 million people. And we've also educated about 250,000 people in water, sanitation, and hygiene best practices. One of our organizational goals is that all of our enterprise partners achieve financial and operational sustainability. So this is critical to ensure that safe water is available for generations to come, and that is not just a short-term solution to a global crisis. So we've got ambitious goals. By 2030, we are aiming to impact 7 million people in 15 countries in sub-Saharan Africa with access to safe water. So that's just a little bit about the organization and sort of what we're trying to accomplish and how we're doing that, which is partnering with local businesses in Africa. In terms of our key fundraising strategies, so we have set ambitious goals for 2030, and we recognize that that's going to require significant levels of capital to achieve our planned impact. I'm not on the fundraising side, I'm on the operational side of our organization, but I'll speak from a fundraising perspective. So traditionally, our fundraising strategy has been focused on a couple things, one of which is building strategic partnerships with like-minded organizations. So we're really looking to partner with donors and organizations who have a similar mission and goals. We don't just take money from anyone. And we also are looking to secure donors who desire to fund market-based sustainable approaches to safe water. So again, we're looking for that mission alignment because a lot of times, money comes with strings attached, and we want to be able to stay true to our mission. And so we try to be strategic with the type of funding that we accept. And then we target a number of different markets in terms of our traditional fundraising. So one of those is the private individual giving markets. And so included in that is individual donors who support us through either monthly giving or initiative-based giving. We have private foundations who support us typically through grants. We have corporations who support us through either sponsorships, gifts in kind, or cash contributions. And then we also work with corporate foundations who typically support us through grants. And so this private giving market has been our bread and butter over the years. We have a pretty solid portfolio of donors who fall within this individual giving market. We also are looking at institutional markets. And so that includes government funding. So from agencies such as the United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, as well as United Nations agencies, such as the World Health Organization, the World Food Program, and the World Bank. Also included in institutional markets are international non-governmental organizations. We call them INGOs. And so that includes organizations such as World Vision, Compassion International, Charity Water. So these are sort of larger nonprofit organizations that typically have a global focus. And so as we've grown as an organization, we are increasingly seeking funding from institutional donors who typically give very targeted funding to accomplish specific things. The challenge with that can be that there are typically more strings attached with this type of funding. So they give you funding to accomplish a very specific thing. But this type of funding also is allowing us to grow at a more substantial rate. And so that's why we're focusing on that now. Then we also target faith-based markets. So we are a faith-based organization. And so we receive support through churches, schools, and then individuals to which faith is a core value. And so, we see that there will always be donors who want to give because of that faith alignment. And we've also seen a trend with institutional donors. So again, like the USAIDs and, United Nations agencies are increasingly interested in partnering with faith-based organizations, both in the US and then local organizations, in the field, so across different continents. So then in terms of events, we're not an event-heavy organization, but we do conduct multiple online campaigns every year. And then we also have an annual fundraising event. Historically was a gala for us, but in recent years, we've switched that to a walk for water. And so all of the funds that we raise as an organization are allowing us to provide subsidies to our enterprise partners. while also building their capacity to grow their customer base and increase their revenue. And again, the goal with that is that each of the enterprises we partner with will become financially viable businesses. So in terms of fundraising in a COVID environment, I suspect, like probably most nonprofits across the world, we've definitely had to do some shifting of our fundraising strategy and just to adapt to the ever-changing environment. So when COVID first hit, we really had no idea what to expect from our donors. Many of them were not able to fulfill their commitments. And then we had others who were able to increase their giving. So thankfully, our work in safe water has remained relevant to what's been happening around the globe this year. And we were able to immediately shift our messaging to focus on the parts of our mission that are already supporting hygiene, sanitation, and disease prevention. So we quickly developed a COVID-19 response to raise funds to meet the immediate needs of our enterprise partners, and they were focused on building hand washing stations, providing soap to schools and clinics, and providing water, sanitation, and hygiene trainings to communities. Since the pandemic started, we've had regular meetings with all of our partners just to stay current on what's happening with them. And that has allowed us to shift our fundraising strategies as needed and to communicate with regular updates to our donors. One thing that we did in recognizing that many of our donors were focused on what was happening locally, we decided to partner with a small local business that produces soap. And we partnered on a campaign to support local frontline healthcare workers here in Oklahoma City. So we built care kits, which included soap, hand sanitizer, and some other products, and distributed those at a local hospital just to show our appreciation for those frontline workers. And our goal with this was to show the connection between what was happening locally and what others experience every day across the globe. We also responded to a number of COVID-specific funding opportunities that became available through USAID, and we submitted a number of grant proposals to existing foundation donors for additional COVID-19 response funding. We were very fortunate to be able to execute our annual fundraiser, which was a Walk for Water. Many nonprofits had to cancel their fundraising events this year or go entirely virtual, and we were still able to host ours both in person and virtually because it was an outdoor event. The last thing I'll mention is just throughout 2020, we've seen the need to diversify our funding base, our donor base, just because of the uncertainty of future funding due to COVID. And so we've begun to look at non-traditional donors like impact investors and other financiers who are interested in partnering with Water4 by providing low interest loans that will yield a high social return on investment. And so that's something that we've been looking into. And these funds are easier to access than grants, but they also require that we have a more efficient and profitable enterprises. And so that has meant that we've needed to shift some of our internal strategy to improve the financials of our own enterprises. So overall, we have been very fortunate to be able to maintain the majority of our donors and to find additional funding that's been COVID related and has funded our COVID-19 response. And we've just focused on being nimble, on identifying creative solutions and looking for opportunities in the midst of the challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. You mentioned during the COVID-19, like you said, it's very challenging to raise capital, but you staying true to your mission and not have any strings attached from your donors who do not align with your mission is very important. So thank you very much for your presentation. On that note, we'll transition to a Q&A section. We have about 8 minutes left. So this is a pre-coordinated questions with the panelists. Once we go through the questions, if we have any time left, we'll address the questions that come in through the chat. So we'll start with Molly, then follow the same order as the presenters panelists went. Molly, do you anticipate any new fundraising approach to stay with are you going to incorporate that going forward, or you will just employ these changes during the COVID-19?
Well, Anna just gave me some ideas. That was so wonderful to hear from you. So I I think that we are relational. So as soon as we can get back to what we're good at, we will do that. But it makes our circle sort of narrow because we rely on people who live close to our organization. And now that we are doing things in other states and training people and other, state organizations, other departments of families and children, I would love to see us do a little more outreach, especially with some sort of social media campaign to get donors in other areas, because I know that our mission aligns with a lot of people, not just people who are foster parents themselves or who were in the foster care system, but it resonates with just about everybody I talk about it with. So I do think we have to be more savvy with fundraising online and going beyond our immediate circles.
Okay, thank you very much. Leo, the same question to you, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as, whether the whole SPAC will fade away or, the idea will fade away or, whether it's going to stay. I mean, I think it's here to stay, especially with the volatile markets we've been seeing. I mean, SPACs aren't new, right? They've been around for, I think, 30 years, since the 90s. I mean, these have been really hot as of late. It may slow down. I mean, it always depends on how much regs come into play. If there's more regs around it and it's not as beneficial to a target, then that probably will slow down the whole process. But as of right now, I mean, it's a quicker, somewhat cheaper way of going public in a time when IPOs haven't halted but are close to, and when a lot of targets are tabling IPOs. So I mean, I think in the near future you're going to see SPACs continue to grow, and I just don't see any reason why it would fade away anytime soon.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I think so too. I agree with you. And Anna, what about you? The same question?
Muting myself. Yeah, so I think probably everything that we've done in response to COVID is something that will benefit us in the future. So, just in terms of diversifying our funding base, that's something that every nonprofit should be looking to do, regardless of the environment. That will always be beneficial. I think, seeing now the capability of doing virtual events, virtual fundraising, I think that allows us to expand our reach. So we can still certainly have in-person events, locally, but being able to host those, across the US and even globally as well, I think just allows us to reach more people. And then also just our expansion into impact investment and looking for that type of funding. And that's something that we were already considering, and I think will continue to serve us well with the type of work that we do and the fact that we partner with for-profit entities in Africa.
Okay. I mean, obviously no one wanted to experience COVID-19, but looks like there is some upside of this phase in our lives. So I'm glad that you found some opportunities for across all those three organizations. Going to second question, number 2. So based on, we'll start the same order, Molly, Leo, and then Anna. Based on the speaker's presentation, have you noticed any or noted any opportunities that you can employ for your organization, whether it's a nonprofit or profit and vice versa? Over to you, Molly.
Yeah, as I was saying, Anna helped me think a little about this idea of impact investing, which I haven't heard much about. So now I'm going to research that. And it also got me thinking about something I'd forgotten long ago. We really would like to partner with somebody who has been impacted by the foster care system. Somebody, perhaps an athlete or even a celebrity, somebody who knows the power of having family or not having family. And so I'm just really grateful that came back to me. I'm putting that on my list right now too. So I don't have anything else. I'm sorry, this one, I don't have much to say.
I understand. Well, thank you very much for your input. Leo, same question.
Yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I don't work with not-for-profits that much, so it's difficult for me to opine on this. So if she allows me to, I'll probably shoot this one to Anna and see what her views are, because I mean, not-for-profits is not something I'm very familiar with.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Well. I mean, I honestly think, Water 4 is really employing a pretty diverse fundraising strategy already. One thing that I heard from Molly's presentation was, the fact that so much of your funding is based on relationships. And I think, for Water 4, we have both the relational donors where, they have gone on a trip or they've had a personal experience and they give for that reason. And then we also, have institutional donors that give grants and other types of funding. So I think it's just sort of keeping all of those on the table and looking to just expand donor reach in all of those different areas. That doesn't exactly answer the question, but I'll leave it at that.
I understand. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So thank you all for presenting your sections. We have about a couple of minutes left. I'll ask Abby to voice out your favorite question. I know perhaps if there's more, so you be the judge which one you would like to voice out and to who it's gonna go. Over to you, Abby.
Sure. So our first question is actually going to be directed for Anna and Molly. And we had an attendee just ask if you could speak a little bit to grant writing and what that has looked like for the two of you. And Molly, if you want to kick it off, we had another attendee also ask how many children Plummer Youth Promise currently serves.
So we directly serve 300 kids a year, and that's in our direct area. Through our residential program, we have an on-point program for reducing criminal activity. We have a transitional living program. We have a number of programs, but the reach is a little bit harder to calculate beyond that because we're training other, sometimes bigger name organizations like the Department of Children and Family, which runs the entire state of Massachusetts foster care. And it's also generational because if we can improve outcomes for kids because they have families, and then they're less likely to have young families. And it's hard to put a number on just how many kids are impacted, but I can say that at least 300, local each year. Grant writing, I can't say too much about it except that I know we do it and we do it well, but I am not the grant writer. But whoever asked that question, I'm happy to put you in touch with our Director of Advancement and Development who can say a lot more about it.
Thank you, Molly.
I'll jump in on the grant writing. Just a couple things that I've learned through my experience with that. I think definitely to focus on alignment with mission. So most funders are pretty clear on what they're trying to accomplish. So if you do not align with their mission, it's probably not worth your time to apply for a grant from them. I think it's always important to demonstrate measurable impact. So they don't just want to know what are you planning to do, but how are you going to measure that impact? How are they going to see how their resources have been used to achieve, what they're wanting to achieve in terms of impact? Be patient. Grant writing can be a long process and it often takes multiple proposals before any of them get accepted. So just go into it knowing that. And then one other thing I'll mention, I think especially relevant in COVID times, is a lot of donors are now looking for nonprofit organizations to partner together. So historically, so many nonprofits have just worked independently, and there's not efficiency when things are done that way. There's overlap, and so I think finding other organizations that have complementary services and that you all can partner with, I think shows your willingness to be engaged, your willingness to work with others, and is really attractive to donors.
Got it. Thank you, Anna. I think we are right there. Abby, please share the speaker's information via chat since we didn't get enough time to address all the questions. I would like to do a closeout. First of all, would like to thank you, Professor Tarabishi, to push us as students to create this content and be part of the conference. Second thank you goes out to the speakers who found time in their busy lives to present and educate us and share their experiences for nonprofit and profit organizations during the COVID-19. And of course, thank you to the rest of the group and all the guests who attended today. Enjoy the rest of the day, and that would be it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for an exceptional moderation of the session. This was a remarkable session. You guys are exceptional. Oh my God, I feel like I am a rookie compared to you guys, and I'm the professor here. So I'm the rookie professor here. So I'm gonna go fix my slides now. Thank you very much. Please join us for the last session, everybody. Thank you, Molly. Molly, I called you the angel of the session here. And Anna, your organization and energy is just impeccable here. So thank you very much. And Leo, I love what you do. You are just all over the world here, but it's impactful. So I want to thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Abby, Dwell, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.